In the heart of Wisconsin, in a tiny town called Plainfield, time seemed to stand still within the borders of its quiet farms. It was 1957, and winter was creeping in with a bitter cold, blanketing the isolated homesteads. Plainfield was never a place for headline news. It was a town where everyone knew your name, and no one dared to imagine that among those desolate farmhouses, events were unfolding that would shake America to its core. On the morning of November 16th, the opening day of the deer hunting season, Bernice Warden, a hard-working 58-year-old woman and the well-known proprietor of the local hardware store, was expected to be at her post as usual. Bernice ran her business with unfailing regularity, but that morning, the unthinkable happened. At noon, her son Frank Warden entered the shop, only to find the doors wide open and the cash register missing. More chillingly, his mother had vanished without a trace, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. There were no signs of a violent struggle, only fresh bloodstains on the floor and a sales ledger left open to the very last purchase. Frank didn't wait. He immediately alerted the local police. When investigator Arthur Schley examined the sales ledger, he found only one name written that morning: Ed Gein. Ed had purchased a gallon of antifreeze shortly before Bernice vanished. Locals told the police that Ed Gein was a shy, eccentric man, a regular at the shop. In their eyes, he wasn't a criminal, just a simple neighbor living alone on his dilapidated farm on the outskirts of town. After finding Ed Gein's name in the sales ledger of the Warden store, investigator Art Schley, accompanied by Officer Lloyd Shiphuster, went out looking for him. They found him at a nearby grocery store, and when they asked him about Bernice's whereabouts, Ed responded with a sentence that sent a chill down their spines. He said simply, "I heard. Someone killed her." A patrol of 4 officers headed toward the Gein farm. It was after 8 p.m., and the darkness was absolute. The farm appeared abandoned. A foul stench filled the air, and the windows were boarded up, as if the house were trying to hide a dark, terrible secret within. The investigators entered the shed attached to the house, using only their flashlights. As one of them moved cautiously through the cluttered junk, he suddenly felt something cold, heavy, and clammy brush against his shoulder in the dark, something hanging from the ceiling. When he raised his flashlight to see what it was, the blood froze in his veins. He had found Bernice Warden, but she wasn't alive, and she wasn't even a normal corpse. She was hanging like a deer, gutted and dressed with a terrifying, surgical precision. But you might think that what you've just heard is the peak of depravity. However, the truth is that what Ed was doing behind those closed doors was far more twisted and repulsive than this. And what you're about to hear next will haunt you. 04. To truly understand why Ed Gein committed such atrocities, we must travel back in time to a childhood spent mostly behind the fences of an isolated farm in Wisconsin. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse County. His father, George Philip Gein, was a broken man and a violent alcoholic. His mother, Augusta Lehman, was a fanatical, domineering, and iron-fisted woman. Ed wasn't alone. He had an older brother named Henry, who was 4 years his senior. In 1914, the family moved to the town of Plainfield, settling on a remote 155-acre farm. Augusta feared the sinful influence of the city, so she isolated her sons completely. Despite his intelligence, Ed never had a single friend throughout his school years. His classmates vividly remembered his sudden, eerie laughter in the middle of class, as if he were laughing at a joke only he could hear. After his father's death in 1940, Ed and Henry took on odd jobs to support their mother. Ed worked in timber cutting and as a handyman, but you will be truly shocked to learn that for years he worked as a babysitter for his neighbors. Yes, families trusted this quiet man with their children, while his mind was secretly drowning in sadistic fantasies and a macabre obsession with Nazi torture stories and cannibalism. It was here that Ed fell into the trap of what is known as the Oedipus complex, a psychological condition where a son develops a repressed, pathological attachment to his mother, seeing her as the sole axis of his existence. Augusta had brainwashed him into believing all women were vessels of sin, except for her, turning his natural love into a destructive, morbid obsession. In 1944, a mysterious event changed everything. A sudden fire broke out on the farm, and Henry was found dead. Although police ruled it an accidental asphyxiation, the details were chilling. Ed led the officers directly to his brother's body in pitch darkness, and bruises were found on Henry's head that the fire couldn't explain. Today, experts agree that Henry was likely Ed's first victim, murdered because he dared to criticize their Holy Mother. And here, I ask you, do you believe Ed got rid of his brother to have his mother's heart all to himself? Or was it just a tragic accident? Share your thoughts in the comments. But the real earthquake that shattered what remained of Ed's mind happened on December 29, 1945. On that day, Augusta Gein died after a second stroke. The only person Ed knew how to live for was gone. She was buried in Plainfield Cemetery, and in that moment, Ed didn't just bury his mother. He buried his last link to reality. Her death was the ultimate turning point. Ed boarded up her bedroom, sealing it forever as a sacred shrine, while he began practicing rituals that your minds will not believe and your hearts will not bear. He decided to reclaim his mother in his own horrific way. Brace yourselves, because the true horror begins now. After Augusta's death, Ed Gein did not live alone in his farmhouse. He lived with an obsession, a twisted one. The longing for his mother burned inside him so deeply that he refused to accept her disappearance. He wanted to see her again, to feel her presence. And slowly, he began planning something no one could ever imagine, to rebuild her, using the remains of others. Ed waited until the town of Plainfield fell into deep sleep. He chose nights when the moonlight was weak, almost gone. He would drive his old truck to Plainfield Cemetery, or to small, isolated graveyards nearby. His choices were never random. He studied obituaries in local newspapers, searching for women who had recently died, middle-aged, with physical features that reminded him of his mother. But how did he do this for years, without anyone discovering him? The answer was simple. He looked harmless. To the neighbors, Ed was just the strange but gentle man, quiet, polite, a man who spent his time reading or working with his hands. No one imagined that behind that calm face was someone who spent the early hours of dawn digging through the earth, pulling back what others had buried. And in those rural areas, the cemeteries had no guards, no lights, allowing Ed to move through the graves in complete silence, like a ghost. He returned home carrying his materials, the pieces he needed for his horrifying project, turning remains into masks, into skin, things he could wear, so that, when he looked into the dark mirror, he could convince himself that his mother had returned. But over time, what he took from the graves was no longer enough. The bodies were dry, lifeless. They lacked what he wanted most: freshness. In 1954, Ed Gein decided to cross the line there was no return from. The first victim was Mary Hogan, 51 years old. She owned a small local tavern in the town of Pine Plain, known for her strong personality and sharp tongue. On December 8th, Mary disappeared. She left behind only a pool of blood and a spent bullet casing. The case remained a mystery for years, and sometimes Ed would joke with people in town, saying that Mary was at his house. Everyone laughed, assuming it was just another bad joke from a harmless, eccentric man. Ed continued his obsession for 3 more years, until 1957. On the morning of November 16th, the opening day of deer hunting season, the second victim disappeared. Bernice Warden, 58 years old, a respected widow, the owner of the local hardware store in Plainfield. Ed was not a stranger to her. He was a regular customer. That morning, Ed entered the store. On the night of November 16th, 1957, Sheriff Arthur Schley and his team arrived at Ed Gein's isolated farmhouse. The property was swallowed by darkness. A foul stench hung in the air. It seemed to leak from every corner. As they stepped into the side shed, a flashlight beam cut through the dark and landed on a sight no human should ever see. They found the body of Bernice Warden, 58 years old, hanging upside down, suspended from metal hooks, treated not like a person, but like game, like a hunted animal during deer season. That discovery was only the beginning. What waited inside the house was beyond human understanding. Police reports from that night documented a horrifying list of items crafted by Ed Gein. Household objects, 10 human skulls, their tops carefully removed, repurposed as food bowls. Furniture, chairs completely covered in human tissue, trash bins made from the same material. The kitchen. Bernice Warden's heart was found inside a pan on the stove. Other organs, preserved in glass jars. Wall masks, 9 masks made from real women's faces, preserved, nailed to the walls of his bedroom, displayed like trophies. And the most terrifying discovery, a complete woman's suit, a bodice, a robe, hand-stitched from human tissue. Ed Gein wore this suit to become his dead mother, Augusta. During the search, investigators also found a box. Inside it, the remains of Mary Hogan, 51 years old, missing for 3 years, confirming that Ed Gein was responsible for her disappearance as well. While the rest of the house overflowed with filth and human remains, one room stood apart, perfectly clean, perfectly ordered, untouched, as if frozen in time. It was his mother's bedroom, Augusta's room. Ed had boarded up the doors and the windows, turning it into a sacred shrine. While the rest of the house, he transformed into a slaughterhouse, all to satisfy his obsession with the body of his lost mother. On the evening of November 16th, 1957, Ed Gein was finally arrested. Not inside his farmhouse, not while hiding, but quietly, inside a small grocery store, owned by a man named Elmer Hill. Ed was sitting there, eating his dinner, calm, silent, when police officers surrounded him. His reaction was unsettling. He did not resist, he did not run, he showed no fear. Later, when investigators confronted him with what they had discovered inside his shed and his home, Ed spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, as if he were describing a normal task, something ordinary. He calmly said he had only killed 2 women, only, and everything else found inside his house were simply items taken from graves. On November 21st, 1957, Ed Gein was charged with first-degree murder, but he was not sent to prison. Doctors examined him, again and again. The diagnosis was clear: paranoid schizophrenia. The court ruled him mentally unfit to stand trial. Ed Gein was sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane in Waupun, Wisconsin. Years passed. In 1968, doctors declared that Ed was finally sane enough to face trial. He was convicted of the murder of Bernice Worden, but because of his mental state at the time of the crime, he was sent back to a psychiatric institution, not prison, a place he would never leave. Ed Gein spent more than 26 years inside mental hospitals. There, he was known as the model patient, quiet, polite, obedient, as if the monster inside him had gone completely silent. On the morning of July 26, 1984, at the age of 77, Ed Gein died at the Mendota Mental Health Institute in Madison, Wisconsin. The cause of death: respiratory and heart failure, caused by cancer. His body was returned to the place where his madness began, Plainfield Cemetery. He was buried in a simple grave, beside his mother, Augusta, and his brother, Henry. But even in death, Ed Gein was not left alone. His gravestone was stolen, vandalized, again and again, by those searching for morbid souvenirs, until finally, in 2001, authorities removed what remained of the headstone. Today, Ed Gein's grave is unmarked, anonymous, faceless, just like the faces he tried to erase. Ed Gein's story was never just another criminal case. It was a shock that shook the very core of American society in the 1950s. For the quiet residents of Plainfield, the neighbor was no longer someone you could trust. Ed Gein destroyed the illusion of safety and proved that the worst nightmares don't come from dark alleys. They come from the house next door, behind the most ordinary face. And even after his death, Ed Gein's shadow never disappeared. It continued to haunt the imagination of writers and filmmakers in Hollywood. Without Ed Gein, there would be no Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, no pure terror in the face of Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and no Buffalo Bill in the Oscar-winning film The Silence of the Lambs. The butcher of Plainfield is gone, but he left behind questions that still have no clear answers, about the human mind, about loneliness, and about what emptiness can do to a soul. And now, if you found this story interesting and terrifying at the same time, support us by liking this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next stories from the world of crime and mystery. Tell us in the comments, do you believe that Ed Gein's life with his mother created the monster? Or do you think evil was always a part of him? Thank you for watching, and until next time, we'll meet again from behind the curtain.